Welcome to Mind Body Monday. In today's session, we're going to be exploring the topic of gluten and gluten sensitivity. What is gluten? Where is it found? And why are so many people going gluten-free? Should you consider going gluten-free too? I don't know. Let's find out. I'm going to be sharing with you my 3 favorite gluten-free grains and why, and one mistake to avoid if you should choose to try going gluten-free. Not long ago in my practice, I saw a 52-year-old woman who was suffering from many digestive disorders and for quite some time, with abdominal pain, bloating, gas, etc. And before she came to see me, she had been scoped this way and that, had many tests, and was found to be free of celiac disease. She had the celiac test and was negative. So she concluded that she should continue or can continue to eat gluten. I'll talk more about celiac disease shortly. And her symptoms just got worse. She felt thoroughly confused and wasn't sure what her next step should be. So based on a careful case history, I did indeed put her on a gluten-free diet, and things began to change for the better. And you're going to see shortly why. For those of you who are new, welcome. My name is Avraham Gundle. I'm the founder and director for the Center for Integrated Medicine. I'm trained as an osteopath, and I practice functional and integrated medicine. And over the last 30 years in my private practice, I've been privileged to have helped thousands of people recover or go into remission from a whole host of chronic health challenges, be it digestive issues, anxiety, autoimmune conditions, type 2 diabetes, arthritis, etc., just to name a few. Now, I'm just curious, if you wouldn't mind typing in the chat, how many of you do have or have had digestive issues and are gluten-free or considering going gluten-free or even tried that? So go ahead, just type in the chat. Do you have a digestive problem and have you tried going gluten-free or are you gluten-free? Just curious to know who is here. And as you do that, I just want to share with you an interesting piece of research that about 18 million Americans have been diagnosed with some sort of gluten sensitivity. And interestingly, that is 6 times the number of Americans who have celiac disease. That means about 3 million have celiac disease, yet 18 million have some sort of gluten sensitivity. Just a word on celiac, because I'm going to cover it a little bit more. Celiac disease is an autoimmune condition that requires a person never eating gluten in their life again, because if they do, there's a protein, gluten is a protein, I'll get to that shortly, that damages the villi, the little hairs inside the small intestine. And this makes it difficult or impossible to absorb nutrients, leading to a whole host of health conditions, including other autoimmune diseases or worse. So before I get to what is gluten and where is it found, I've just seen in the chat that someone types in there, have a digestive problem, but was not considering gluten-free. Well, I'm so happy you are here because maybe it could be something to explore. Someone else has typed in, yes, my body has taken on RA, rheumatoid arthritis. And just as your body has chose to take that on, I'm hoping it will choose to give it up with a little bit of direction or slow at least the process down. So what is gluten and where is it found? So gluten is a protein found in a bunch of grains, and those are wheat, barley, possibly oats, if there's been cross-contamination, the grain rye, and spelt. Now, I was fascinated by why is gluten-free so trendy? And I'm going to give you three answers now, really my approach to that, and a fourth one possibly coming in a few minutes. So part of the trend of gluten-free, I think, is because more refined and processed foods are out on the market and people are eating a lot of junk food and are feeling really poorly, and as a result, looking for quick fixes. So film stars and media personalities have been touting gluten-free, be it for weight loss or overcoming fatigue or to get clearer skin or for some other reason. So it's more in the media that way. Also, gluten itself as a grain, as a substance, undergoes a tremendous amount of processing. And this processing makes it even harder for digestive systems to digest and absorb. And people who have got sensitive tummies or have a sensitivity to other allergies or specifically gluten or wheat, we'll get to that shortly, will have a hard time digesting this highly processed gluten. And the third possible reason for why gluten would be so trendy is I think there's a greater awareness, but also because of better diagnostic tools and tests to diagnose celiac disease. It's easily fixed and catastrophic if left unattended to. A lot of my patients ask me whether gluten sensitivity means that they have some sort of autoimmune condition. Now, I explained to them that a person can be on the autoimmune spectrum, and this is the concept that I'm introducing. There is a spectrum of autoimmune disease. On the extreme end is celiac disease, which is a genetic autoimmune condition, and on the other end and everything in between is any sort of inflammatory condition in the body, either neurologically or physiologically in the mind, in the brain, or in the body that has an autoimmune component. So the key point here is that if an autoimmune condition is left unchecked, then it can devolve into much more serious, sinister conditions, and we'll see about that shortly. So what I see in my clinic, which is very, very common, is a condition called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. This is NCGS, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Now, let's just look at that a little bit more. Gluten sensitivity is a disorder where one cannot tolerate gluten and experiences similar symptoms to celiac disease, which could be bloating, gas, alternating between diarrhea and perhaps constipation, fatigue, and a few other symptoms as well. Because, and the only difference between non-gluten sensitivity and celiac is there isn't the same antibodies and intestinal damage as in celiac disease, but they may share a lot of the symptoms as well. So if you've been suffering from symptoms and they seem to be related to gluten and you're not celiac or you haven't been tested, firstly, I'd recommend being tested. But most importantly, you could be in this gray category called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And a fair number of my patients, like the patient I opened up with in the story, is that she was tested negative to gluten, but yet negative to celiac, but sensitive to gluten. And I see this a lot with a lot of my patients who may have digestive distress, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, gas, abdominal pain, and even lactose intolerance. Because remember the villi, those small little hairs in the small intestine, which actually digest lactose. And if those little hairs are being destroyed from gluten or inflammation in the gut, then lactose won't be able to be absorbed as well. And that could be that non-celiac gluten sensitivity is what's going on with this particular person. If it could be you, I don't know. What's important to realize is that these symptoms could well be an early warning sign. It's a little bit like that orange light that comes on your dashboard. It cannot and must not be ignored. Any pain or discomfort in the body is a warning sign, and the body loves to heal if given the right direction, circumstances, and environment. and that very much could happen. However, if you ignore these symptoms, then a person could move along the spectrum to have a worsening, a full-blown autoimmune condition, which can really be avoided. I'll just give you an example what I see in my clinic also, where if this goes unchecked, where people who have a non-celiac gluten sensitivity continue on with having gluten and processed diet, meaning a diet with high processed flours or processed oils or high in sugar and things like that, the body moves into inflammation and can tip over into an autoimmune response. And what I see happening a lot in my clinic is that patients who have low thyroid, hypothyroid, or sometimes even a Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition, research has found that they also have a very high gluten sensitivity. So my low thyroid patients, in addition to doing a full lab workup, I'll also have them go off gluten and they begin to thrive. So this research was actually found in PubMed that gluten was one of the main culprits found in Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is a condition, autoimmune condition of the thyroid. So having a low thyroid condition could be another reason to consider going gluten-free. So the question that I also get in the clinic is, how can I test for gluten sensitivity? Well, there is a blood test for gliadin. Gliadin, G-L-I-A-D-I-N, gliadin is a protein component of gluten. The challenge is that there are 4 kinds of gliadin. There's alpha, beta, gamma, and omega parts of this, of the gliadin protein. And the gliadin test is only testing the alpha component, just one of the components of gliadin. That means that a person may be testing for gluten sensitivity just through the alpha test and be shown to be negative, but still have symptoms because perhaps the other 3 components, which are not being tested for various reasons, they may be reactive to those. So it's not so straightforward to have a simple blood test to figure out, is it gluten sensitive, if a person gluten sensitive or not. In addition, there are over 24 other components to wheat that can cause reactivity that are not gluten based. So within the wheat itself, there's gluten, and gluten has 4 parts, but then the rest of the wheat, there's 24 other components that people could be reactive to. So it's kind of challenging for a patient to figure out, or even a local doctor who's got 8 minutes for each patient to figure out exactly what the person's problem is. So the key takeaway so far is that it's essential to have a proper diagnosis, to distinguish between 3 things: celiac disease, which is straightforward to diagnose, a wheat allergy, which is also relatively straightforward to diagnose, and a gluten sensitivity, which is a gray area. Because once you have these 3 figured out, then proper management and care for the short, medium, and long term can be done with proper follow-up. So if you've got an undiagnosed digestive problem, or you have difficulty losing weight, or possibly fatigue, or an inflammatory condition in your body, but don't have celiac disease, you may want to consider going on a gluten-free diet. But before you do it, it's always best to check with your local doctor or an expert nutritionist to do it right, because it can go wrong where people think staying off gluten is all they need to do. Because going gluten-free doesn't mean at all you're following a healthy meal plan. In fact, a lot of my patients who may have chosen to be vegan or vegetarian come to me are in terrible shape because they're not doing it in an informed, knowledgeable way. They simply cut out an entire food group and haven't looked to supplement with other foods high in protein, minerals, etc. I'll give you an example. One of my patients loves to snack in the afternoon when they get a little bit of an energy dip. They're on a gluten-free diet. Well, they came to me on gluten-free, but their go-to was these corn chips that are gluten-free, but they are loaded with processed oils, sugars, and low in nutrients. So they may fill a person up, but they rob the body of key nutrients and add insult to injury through the processed oils and sugars, etc. In fact, I jokingly mentioned to my patients, the best place to shop for health foods is absolutely not the health food shop. And they all lift an eyebrow and be a little bit surprised. And that's because when you go to a health food shop, a person's guard is generally down because they assume everything inside the store is healthy. Well, the best advice I can give you is, regardless of where you shop, always read labels and also ask and do your own research. Don't simply read the label and go with the shop attendant's answers to questions you may have, but really read labels and become an educated gluten-free shopper. Now, if you choose to go gluten-free, I will give you just one tip that I see this mistake people making a lot when they come to see me. They said, oh, well, Dr. Gundle, we've tried that and it didn't work. So research has shown that a few weeks or even just a month or so on gluten-free doesn't always work for many people, especially if there's residual inflammation in the diet or people anywhere on the autoimmune spectrum. In fact, research has shown that anybody with an autoimmune thyroid problem or even leaky gut may have gluten showing up in their system or gluten reactivity showing up in their system many, many months later, even though they've been off gluten. So the key takeaway to get it right is don't give up too quickly and work close with a healthcare practitioner that understands you and understands gluten and health and well-being, obviously. Before we end, I just want to share with you my 3 favorite gluten-free grains. In fact, just before Mind Body Monday, I had a bowl of vegetable soup with my favorite gluten-free grain in, and that is quinoa. Quinoa, some people call it quinoa. My 3 favorite gluten-free grains are quinoa, buckwheat, and teff. And the amazing thing about quinoa particularly, and it is my favorite, is because it is a complete protein. Most grains need a grain and a legume. Like rice is not a complete protein. You need to have lentils with it to complete the 9 full amino acids. But quinoa is a complete protein, and so is buckwheat. It's easy to digest, high in magnesium, rich in antioxidants. So with my vegetable soup, I had a bowl of vegetable soup, which I poured over a bowl of quinoa, and it was absolutely delicious. So before I take questions, you know what? Let me look at the chat, take some questions, and then I'll end with a weekly challenge, how I always like to end Mind Body Monday. So someone's written in, is a skin rash, eczema also a symptom? Yeah, firstly, it is a symptom. And I always look to make things as simple as possible, especially when it comes to kids or children. Going off gluten-free is firstly difficult. Going off gluten, it may be difficult in terms of with kids, school, socializing. So before I do it, I want to make sure that that's really the problem. But it's definitely a symptom, and it's the body's calling for help. Someone said, my son has EOE. Would he benefit from going off gluten? I don't recall what EOE is, so if you want to write that in the chat, I'll let you know. But if it's some sort of inflammatory condition, my experience is a person doesn't have to go off gluten for life, but it is part of an initial anti-inflammatory program that I see weird and wonderful things healing beautifully. So I just want to say to all of you, thank you so much for joining me on Mind Body Monday. before I end, I like to end with a challenge. The challenge is, if you've been toying with going gluten-free, or if you have an inflammatory condition or a digestive issue, then the invitation here is to learn a little bit about, do a Google search perhaps, or better work with a healthcare practitioner. And you can explore going off gluten in a smart way for 10 days or 14 days, and just notice what you experience. Do you feel lighter? Do your bowels feel easier? Do you have a clearer head, less brain fog, etc.? Perhaps more energy? I don't know, but it is definitely something worth exploring. Yes, the EOE has been untangled. Yes, interesting. Esophagitis. Okay, it's an autoimmune condition. Thank you, Ruchama. I don't know. I haven't worked with this condition, but I've worked with enough autoimmune conditions. And as I see, as time goes on, there are new fandangled autoimmune conditions coming out all the time. Why? The body is attacking itself for all sorts of reasons. And I've seen that the clearer you make and cleaner the body, removing possible irritants, bringing down inflammatory markers through proper nutrition, supplementation, and lifestyle, the most hardened autoimmune conditions begin to ease their grip and the body begins to heal. So I don't have personal experience with this particular one, but I'm confident that if you work with a healthcare practitioner who's got a functional medicine approach, an integrated medicine approach, you're probably going to get the results you need. And someone's written in the chat, he's had digestive problems, but since test positive for celiacs, went on gluten-free diet, problem has disappeared. Wow. I'm so happy you've written that in the chat. Thank you. That's wonderful. In fact, 30% of Americans are undiagnosed celiac disease. And this is a very aggressive condition that is easily solvable, and people are walking around with it. And the simple solution is A, to get tested, B, avoid gluten. But then there's the gray area of non-gluten, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And once a person has been diagnosed in that gray zone and get off gluten and a healthy program, healing is just around the corner. So the challenge for you all to think about, read about, ponder about, is to consider 10 days or 2 weeks of going gluten-free. Please let me know, send me an email, or the replay will be posted on YouTube. In the comments, let me know how you get along. And this way I can respond and will strengthen consciousness in the community as well. Thanks once again for joining me on Mind Body Monday. I look forward to seeing you next week. And just remember, self-care is the heart of healthcare. And it only takes one small step to enhance your health and well-being in mind, body, and soul. See you next week.